With Sonic and Shadow Generations coming out this year, I thought it would be a great time to talk about the boss fights in Sonic Generations. I remember going to the midnight release for this game back in 2011, and it quickly became one of my favorite modern Sonic games. I remember loving everything this game had to offer, from the levels, to the special abilities, to the awesome bosses, and of course the rival fights too. Today, we're going to look back at both the bosses and rival battles and rank them on a tier list from S to E, Sonic Adventure 2 style. I'll be ranking each boss in its hard mode variant, and then give some thoughts and opinions on each boss fight. We'll go in chronological order in which you encounter each boss in the game, starting with Metal Sonic. Metal Sonic is the first rival battle that you face up against in Sonic Generations. In this rival battle, you play as classic Sonic as you auto-scroll across the bad future of Stardust Speedway. Metal Sonic has a variety of attacks, such as his boost move, reminiscent of his acceleration attack from Sonic CD, and his electricity shield that hurts you if you touch it. He can also knock lampposts at you, and has a second version of his boost where a set of platforms appear on the upper part of the screen that you can use to get behind Metal Sonic to avoid damage. Metal Sonic can usually only be damaged after performing one of his attacks, but you can actually damage Metal Sonic while he's charging up for his electricity force field move. Since you're also battling with the physics of the auto-scrolling, you can quickly rev up the spin dash to reach Metal Sonic's position to damage him if you find yourself falling behind. The hard mode variant of Metal Sonic isn't very hard at all. He requires the same amount of hits to defeat him, and just hits more lampposts at you during this phase. I believe the speed in which he performs his attacks is also increased, making any preemptive hits slightly harder, but I didn't notice too much of a difference here. In all, this is a really cool boss battle, but I do wish there was a bit more of a challenge in the hard mode. Also, the way Sonic finishes off Metal Sonic is similar to that of a QTE, and I kinda wish that Sonic Generations had QTEs for finishing off the bosses in this game, especially the rival fights. I think tapping a random button within a small time frame would add just a little something extra to this boss fight, and if you fail the QTE, the player must land another hit or two on Metal Sonic before the player is granted the opportunity to do the quick time event again. That's just a little idea that I had. So, where does this go on the tier list? Well, I do like that this is a proper boss battle of the Sonic CD Metal Sonic fight. In Sonic CD, you race Metal Sonic to the end of the stage as he performs attacks based on if you're ahead or behind him. In this fight, you're actually battling him. With the variety of attacks Metal can perform and the awesome finisher Classic Sonic delivers, I'm gonna put both the normal and hard mode versions of this fight in B tier, primarily because the hard mode variant isn't much different than the normal one, but they are both really cool fights nonetheless. The next boss fight, or should I say the first official boss fight of the game, is the Death Egg Robo from Sonic 2. Here you battle Eggman on the Death Egg as you fight through two phases of the Death Egg Robot. The first phase has you avoiding Eggman's arm attacks and then going underneath him when he jumps into the air in order to attack him from behind, which is his only weak spot for this phase. After a few hits, the elevator in which you're on reaches the top of its destination, and you have to activate these switches that make these bombs appear. Your objective is then to lead Eggman's arms to these bombs in order to stun him. Once you do that, you can jump on his arm to travel up to his head and then land a hit. It's pretty easy once you know what to do. In hard mode, you have to land an additional hit or two on the first phase, whereas the second phase maintains the same number of hits you must land in order to win. Eggman is a little faster on hard mode, but it's ultimately the same boss fight. With that said, both normal and hard mode for this boss lands itself in C tier for the lack of creativity and challenge with this fight. While it's a nice spin on the Death Egg Robo boss fight from Sonic 2, an additional phase or more varied attacks would have made this fight a bit more memorable in my book. As a side note, the way this boss fight ends could have also been a super cool QTE, and again, if the player were to fail it, it would result in having to get another hit or two to reach the QTE again. I would say I'm a little disappointed by this boss fight, which is why it goes in C tier. Up next is Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow is the second rival battle, third boss fight, and the first rival battle and boss fight modern Sonic faces in Sonic Generations. This used to be my favorite boss fight in the entire game, and I remember playing this rival battle for hours and hours until I learned how the fight actually works. This rival battle is similar to the final boss in the hero story in Sonic Adventure 2, in which Sonic and Shadow run across the Arc using their abilities to best one another. In Generations, this is pretty much an epic remaster of that fight in which you and Shadow are boosting to reach the Chaos Cores, which will fill up your special meter at the top of the screen. If Shadow reaches the cores before Sonic, you'll get to perform his signature Chaos Spear ability. Not to be confused with his Chaos Spear that he'll use on you if you fall too far behind, which by the way is a nice little detail referencing Sonic Adventure 2, where Shadow would perform Chaos Spear if you fell too far behind. If Sonic gets all the Chaos Cores, he gets a Chaos Boost, where his boost becomes purple, and you must hit meteors at Shadow which hone in on him, which is honestly really fucking lame. I love this entire boss battle except this part. How are you gonna play a banging ass track like Live and Learn for Sonic, only to have dude smack meteors at Shadow to slow him down? Like, we should have gotten some sort of epic boost clash between Sonic and Shadow, or Sonic performing some epic variant of Chaos Wind or something. Anything but hitting meteors at Shadow would have been acceptable. Anywho, the hard mode version of this fight adds an additional meter onto Sonic and Shadow's energy gauge, making the fight last a bit longer. Shadow's pathing is also a little different, and he's a bit more aggressive at grabbing the Chaos Drive cores. He's still not the biggest threat on hard mode, but hard mode does add a slight bit of challenge and length to the battle. The normal variant of the Shadow rival boss fight lands itself in B tier for being pretty fun, while the hard mode variant drops itself in A tier for being a bit more challenging and on brand for what a Shadow the Hedgehog boss fight should be. Since you get more playtime out of hard mode, and screwing up usually results in Shadow obtaining a core, that's why it ranks higher on my list. Perfect Chaos is the next boss fight on this list, and is modern Sonic's first actual boss fight in the game that isn't a rival fight. First off, the sheer concept of this fight alone sends chills down my spine. Regular base Sonic versus Perfect Chaos, the final boss from Sonic Adventure 1 that took Sonic transforming into Super Sonic in order to beat this one. I guess Sonic really was locking in throughout the years. In both the main and hard mode versions of this fight, you'll be boosting across water and dilapidated buildings in order to reach Perfect Chaos to land a hit. Both modes require you to hit Chaos 4 times. The only difference is that in hard mode, your boost gauge gets used up much quicker, and there are no 2D sections in hard mode. The final phase of both modes has you platform on the ruined city rather than boost to reach Chaos. The fight is actually pretty intense. So, the ranking of this fight is going to be a little bit different. The hard mode version of this fight lands itself to B tier, while the main version of this fight goes to A tier. Now, normally I hate the 2D sections in modern Sonic games, but this is one of the rare occasions where I think it actually adds something to the game. To me, the 2D sections of this boss fight actually add a bit of challenge and variety, unlike in hard mode, which I've never been a fan of because of how quickly the boost depletes. Sure, it makes you act strategically and when to use the boost, but the level design doesn't really reflect this, as there are plenty of areas with shallow water. Plus, once you reach Perfect Chaos, you can just travel through his insides without the boost. The regular version feels much more cinematic, and I think it's because of those 2D sections. Silver the Hedgehog is the third and final rival boss of the game, and the fifth boss fight in the game. Silver is the most difficult of the rival fights, as you'll be ducking, dodging, quick-stepping, and homing attacking your way around a ruined city in the future. A little quick tip. After the opening cutscene with Silver, right after he picks up the car, if you act fast enough you can boost and homing attack the car to get a quick hit on Silver once the fight begins. In this fight, you'll be avoiding Silver's objects that he uses his telekinesis on in order to crush you. Silver has a variety of attacks that he uses, including picking up the city ruins to throw at you, crushing you with objects 10 times his size, and even his own psycho knives, which are basically his own ranged attack. The hard mode variant of this boss fight just requires you to hit Silver a few additional times, and some of his attacks are a little trickier to dodge. It's mostly the same fight though. Both variants of this fight go to A tier because they're both a lot of fun to play. I didn't find that big of a difference between normal and hard mode with this rival battle. However, because of this cool thing you can do in both modes is why I ranked these at both A. While Silver is charging his Psycho Knife, if you time it correctly, you can boost homing attack through it in order to hit Silver, which is an awesome way to finish off a boss in my opinion. I don't know, something about cutting through or dodging an enemy's attack and then landing your own final blow always tickles my fancy, and I love when movies, shows, and video games do stuff like that. Also, this beats the Sonic 06 Silver fight by miles. The final regular boss battle is the Egg Dragoon from Sonic Unleashed, in which you take on as modern Sonic. This is such a cool spin on this fight, in which Sonic originally took on as the Hedgehog, resulting in that fight being more of an arena-based battle. Here, you'll constantly be running except for 2 parts of this fight that we'll talk about later. This boss has 4 phases, 2 of them which are in 3D and the other 2 which are in 2D. For the first 2D section, Sonic has to avoid Eggman's frost attack, which is pretty fun to do once you get the timing right. You'll occasionally get the chance to hit Eggman in this phase, but more or less when you're playing on hard mode. The second 2D section has Sonic wall jump across Eggman's machine while avoiding his ice projectiles. Once you reach the top, you can hit Eggman with a homing attack. Now the first 3D section has you running in this open area where you can find these ramps to get up onto some rails in order to gain the high ground and land an attack. If you miss these ramps, you'll have to quick step to avoid a variety of attacks, which can be challenging as Sonic's left and right movement physics have been altered to make this boss fight more challenging. The second 3D phase, and the final phase of this boss fight, has Sonic free falling towards the Egg Dragoon as Eggman tries to launch his drills at you, making this part extremely fun and cinematic. Once you reach Eggman, you can perform a homing attack to defeat him once and for all. On hard mode, the amount of hits required to defeat the Egg Dragoon has increased significantly, and the timing to his attack patterns is different than the normal mode, such as the speed he launches these icicles at you, and the slow speed in which these icicles fall. Hard mode is definitely a lot more challenging, which adds to the fun factor since this boss isn't exactly hard once you learn the new timing of each attack and phase. Normal mode of the Egg Dragoon goes to A tier, while hard mode for this boss fight goes to S tier. The sheer amount of challenge that this boss has makes this fight so much fun. It's not a pushover on hard mode, and you're gonna die at least once before getting this one down. Mastering the timing in the 2D sections feel incredibly satisfying, and free falling while avoiding Eggman's drill hands is the perfect conclusion on how this boss fight is finished off. It's actually one of my favorite boss fights in the entire mainline Sonic games. And then last but not least, we have the final boss, the Time Eater. I'm gonna talk about the normal and hard mode variants of this boss fight together, since the only difference I was able to spot was the amount of time and hits it took to defeat this guy in hard mode. Outside of that, there wasn't much of a difference. Anyway, modern Sonic and classic Sonic enter their super forms in order to take on the Time Eater, which is being controlled by both modern and classic Eggman. This boss wasn't all that fun to me. You switch between modern and classic Sonic based on what plane the Time Eater enters. For modern Sonic, you have to avoid Eggman's homing shot, which are projectiles that slowly follow you. And trust me, you won't forget about this attack at all.
It's probably nothing.
Aside from that, you just avoid pieces of green hill zone floating around and boost when Eggman's arms try to push you back. You can use classic Sonic as a projectile to clear some of the projectiles coming at you, but it's not really useful until you get up close to Eggman. When Eggman switches to 2D, you can switch to classic Sonic and do exactly the same thing, but in 2D. Eggman has this beam ability that slows you down and this time stop ability which also slow you down, but neither attacks damage you. In fact, none of his attacks damage you. They're kinda there to just waste your time and prevent you from reaching the Time Eater's core, which you have to boost into in order to inflict damage. The main challenge of this boss fight is staying on top of your ring count. As you know in every Sonic game, going supersonic drains your rings. And here is no different. It's much easier to see and grab rings with classic Sonic during the 2D section, as it's damn near impossible to see anything in the 3D section, especially little ass golden artifacts the size of classic Sonic's finger. In all, this boss fight is probably about a C tier. It's one of the weaker supersonic final boss fights in the entire series in my opinion, probably because it's not all that challenging or memorable. The only memorable part about this fight is the large red energy ball Eggman unleashes upon you when you finally knocked his health down. While the rest of the boss is mid, to say the least, this little quick time event is peak. Here you hold down the triggers to have both modern and classic Sonic combine an attack to break through Frieza's supernova and destroy the Time Eater's core once and for all, thwarting Dr. Eggman's plans once again. But yeah, that has been my rankings of the boss and rival battles in Sonic Generations. After watching the gameplay of Shadow's first stage and boss in Sonic and Shadow Generations, I can't wait to see what else the game will throw our way. While I doubt any significant changes will happen to the boss fights in the base version of Sonic Generations, one can only hope for some adjustments to have been made to make them more fun than the original game released back in 2011. I'd love to see some QuickTime events added to the boss fights in Sonic's part of the game, or some added difficulty at the very least. But I guess we'll find out later this year when Sonic and Shadow Generations finally drops in October. If you guys would like us to play and cover that game, please consider subscribing and liking this video so that we know that this is the type of content you want to see here on the channel. We're huge Sonic fans and can't wait for the new game and movie coming out later this year. In the meantime, let us know what you guys think about Shadow and Sonic Generations and the third Sonic movie coming out. We'll have some Sonic animations over on our second channel, Real Life Glitch Entertainment, that you won't want to miss out on. But until then, I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.